Have you ever noticed that the biggest mysteries don't explode into public view? They quietly sit in plain sight, waiting for someone to ask the question nobody else will ask? And here's the question that has been whispering through commentary forums, Royal Watch podcasts, fan communities, and late-night discussions across the world. How is it possible, genuinely possible, that King Charles III, the monarch of one of the most scrutinized families on Earth, has reportedly never seen, met, or even been in the same room as his granddaughter, Lilibet? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Pause for a moment. Sit with that. Because once you let the weight of that sentence fully settle, the story takes on a much darker, deeper, and stranger shape than anyone expected. This isn't just about a family feud. This isn't just about royal protocols or personal disagreements. This is about a child, or more specifically, the worldwide mystery surrounding one. And the moment you begin looking closely, even casually, you quickly realize something feels off. Where is Lilibet? Why does her presence in the public record feel like smoke slipping through fingers? Always there, yet never quite solid. Why does every timeline feel fuzzy? Every released photo immediately questioned. Every supposed appearance strangely unverifiable. And perhaps the eeriest part of all, why has no senior member of the royal family publicly confirmed being with her in person? Not a single verified moment. Not a single uncontested photograph. Not a single documented meeting. You would think that in the era of non-stop media coverage, paparazzi culture, and royal public interest, someone, anyone, would have seen something. A glimpse. A detail. A moment. But instead, what we have is a silence so absolute that it starts to sound like a message in itself. And then, allegedly, came the quiet comment behind palace walls. A comment attributed to King Charles. A comment so subtle, yet so profound, that insiders say it shifted the entire atmosphere around the question of Lilibet's existence. I have not met her. 5 words. Calm. Measured. Almost too ordinary. But those 5 words detonated like a quiet bomb. And the reason they hit so hard is simple. They raise more questions than they answer. Why hasn't he met her? Why hasn't he, the grandfather, seen her, even for a moment? What circumstances would allow such a distance? Is this simply the painful result of family conflict? Or does the story stretch farther, deeper, and stranger than any of us thought? These are not accusations. These are not claims. These are questions sparked by the lack of clarity surrounding a child placed at the center of royal headlines, yet somehow outside the realm of public reality. Because while the world has seen Prince George smile shyly at cameras, Princess Charlotte wave politely at crowds, and Prince Louis go viral for his unpredictable antics, the youngest child in the Sussex family remains wrapped in shadows. Not hidden, because hidden implies intentionality. More like missing from the natural rhythm of public life in a way that doesn't quite make sense. And that contradiction, the clash between expectation and reality, is where this story truly begins. Because when a royal baby is born, the world usually sees something. We see the tiny fingers, the bundled blanket, the proud parents, a small face peeking out, something to confirm presence, existence, even if only fleetingly. But with Lilibet, every thread seems to lead to another question, another gap, another mystery. And that is why this story matters now. Because as Charles steps into his reign fully, questions of legacy, lineage, and the next generation of royals suddenly matter more than ever. They shape public identity. They shape history. They shape the future monarchy. But how do you shape a future around a child the public has never clearly seen, the family has never openly acknowledged in person, and the king himself has reportedly never met? Let me bring you deeper into the emotional undertow of this mystery. Imagine being a grandfather, not just any grandfather, but the king, and having a granddaughter you've never looked into the eyes of, never held, never cradled, never watched giggle or reach for your finger. Imagine the ache of that absence. Is it emotional distance? Is it circumstance? Is it personal choice? Or is it something none of us have fully considered yet? Whatever the reason, there is a fracture here, a silence, a gap. And these gaps do not exist in isolation, they build a pattern. When you line up the facts, the timelines, the conflicting statements, and the strangely choreographed public appearances, or lack thereof, something begins to feel unusual. And not just unusual, unprecedented. Because if Lilibet is truly at the heart of a family torn apart, a media empire built on images, and a monarchy trying to navigate modernity, then her absence isn't passive. It's meaningful. Something is behind it. Something is shaping it. And that something is what we are about to explore. Not to accuse, not to harm, not to stir negativity, but to follow the story as it has unfolded in public perception. A story filled with contradictions, curiosities, and unanswered questions that the world keeps circling back to. And just when you think you've reached the bottom of the mystery, you realize you've only scratched the surface. Because what if I told you that the seeds of doubt were planted much earlier than anyone realized? What if the moment this story truly began wasn't with a photograph, or an interview, or even the birth announcement, but with the timeline that didn't align? Yes, there is a timeline. A moment in the chronology of events that feels like the first crack in an already fragile foundation. And that timeline, that odd, uncomfortable detail nearly everyone missed, is the entry point into the next chapter. A chapter that changes everything. A chapter where the story shifts from curious to unsettling. That first inconsistency isn't dramatic at first glance. It's subtle, almost imperceptible, but subtle cracks, over time, can turn into massive fractures. And in the case of Lilibet, the fracture begins with the timeline of her birth, the reported announcements, and the curious absence of trusted witnesses. Let's rewind. Lilibet was born in June 2021 in Santa Barbara, California, a quiet, private birth compared to the global spectacle of other royal arrivals. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had moved to the U.S., and they were intent on maintaining a level of privacy. That much is clear. But the question remains. If this child exists in the public eye's most scrutinized family, why were there so few verifiable confirmations of her presence in those early days? We have seen this pattern before with the Sussexes, private events, selective exposure, controlled media releases. But something about Lilibet's case felt different. There were no official photographs released by Buckingham Palace. There were no ceremonial introductions to extended family. And the timing of public statements created more questions than they answered. Every announcement was carefully worded, often vague, leaving gaps that the public could only speculate about. And here's where it gets even stranger. Royal tradition dictates that grandparents, especially reigning monarchs or heirs to the throne, are involved in these landmark moments, at least in ceremonial or symbolic ways. Prince Charles, as the grandfather, would normally have had some official acknowledgement or meeting, even if brief. But reports suggest that he had not. Not at the time. Not immediately. And according to some sources, not even in private. Pause for a moment and imagine the tension in those palace halls. A new generation, and yet the king himself is absent. Add in the careful choreography of the Sussexes' media appearances and interviews, and a peculiar question begins to emerge. Why would a family so accustomed to controlling public perception allow a gap like this? Some speculate it's simple. Distance due to logistics, location, and the transatlantic divide. Others hint at deeper tensions, personal disagreements, conflicts with palace expectations, the shadow of past rifts. And while these possibilities are tempting to consider, none fully explains the reported claim that King Charles has never met Lilibet. Not once. The emotional undertone here is staggering. The image of a grandfather separated from his granddaughter touches something primal. Royal families are often thought of as distant, formal institutions. But even within that formal distance, there is an expectation of connection, of lineage, of continuity. And when that connection seems missing, the public reaction isn't just curiosity, it's unease. What does it mean when the king, the man whose entire life has been dedicated to service, family, and legacy, admits in private, or allegedly admits, that he has never laid eyes on a grandchild? The story doesn't stop at absence. It moves into contradiction. Because while Charles supposedly has never met Lilibet, the world has been given glimpses, fleeting, selective, controlled glimpses, of her existence. There are photos released by the Sussexes, videos with subtle frames of her small hand, brief appearances during interviews, and yet every visual cue seems layered with intentional ambiguity. Some people call it cautious parenting. Others call it media strategy. But the undeniable fact is this. no independent verification exists. Every piece of media is filtered, curated, and presented through the lens of a highly managed public narrative. And in that curated space, uncertainty breeds speculation. Here's where the psychological tension intensifies. The public craves certainty. People need evidence. They want proof. Yet all they receive are tantalizing glimpses and selective narratives. And when those glimpses are contrasted with the alleged statement from King Charles, the discrepancy feels almost theatrical, as if the story has been intentionally designed to provoke debate, intrigue, and emotional investment. And let's not forget the timing. This revelation, or alleged confirmation, didn't come in a vacuum. It arrives at a moment when the monarchy faces heightened scrutiny, when the Sussexes are both highly visible and highly controversial in the media, and when every statement, public appearance, and interview is dissected with relentless attention. The layers of tension are enormous. Now, consider the human element. What must it feel like for Charles to balance the public's expectation, his role as a father and grandfather, and the private intricacies of family relationships? The king is under pressure unlike any other person in the world. Every interaction, every silence, every absence is scrutinized, often unfairly. Yet the silence about Lilibet cuts through even the most seasoned public observer. It's an absence so striking that it compels attention. This is not just a story about a child. It's a story about perception, secrecy, trust, and family dynamics at the very top of a centuries-old institution. The emotional stakes are immense. On one side, a grandfather who reportedly has never met his granddaughter. On the other, parents who carefully curate every exposure, every narrative. And at the center, the child, Lilibet, who exists, but whose reality is debated, dissected, and scrutinized in ways no other child should ever face. And here's the kicker. What makes this story even more shocking is that we've only begun to scratch the surface. Every timeline we think we understand, every photo we assume is definitive, every statement we take at face value contains contradictions. And those contradictions are not minor. They shape how we understand not just Lilibet's life, but the dynamics of the modern British monarchy itself. So, as we move deeper into this exposé, keep asking yourself, what would it mean if the most powerful man in the monarchy admits, in essence, that he has never witnessed one of the most fundamental moments of continuity in a royal family, the meeting of a new generation? Because as you will see, the story is not just about absence. It's about secrets, omissions, and revelations that have the potential to rewrite perceptions of a family, a dynasty, and a legacy. And the first major inconsistency, the very thread that begins to unravel the entire narrative, is closer than you think. It's hidden in plain sight, overlooked by almost everyone, yet its implications are seismic. The question now becomes, will we accept the surface-level narrative, or will we dive into the cracks, follow the hidden paths, and confront the mysteries that the monarchy seems reluctant to address? Because once you start following the trail, the story shifts from curious to compelling, from intriguing to shocking. Imagine this: a child born into one of the most scrutinized families on earth, yet her existence seems almost ethereal. Not because she isn't real. She is, legally, medically, and officially, but because every public trace of her presence leads to questions, contradictions, and gaps that even the most seasoned royal watchers struggle to explain. That is the paradox of Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor. The first thing to understand is context. Royal children, especially those in direct lineages, do not exist in private vacuums. Every move is documented, sometimes obsessively. Prince George's first steps were photographed. Princess Charlotte's school outings were noted. Even Prince Louis, the youngest Cambridge child, has been documented at dozens of family events. And yet, Lilibet? Her public appearances are fleeting, selective, and heavily filtered. One photo here, one hand in frame there, a video clip carefully cropped. No independent verification, no unscripted moments. Nothing that solidly confirms what most would assume, that she is living, growing, and being nurtured in the world her parents claim she inhabits. It's not just the absence of public sightings that intrigues people, it's the silence in official channels. Buckingham Palace, a meticulous chronicler of royal lineage and events, has issued no formal documentation of her being seen by senior royals, including the king himself. No official visit. No ceremonial acknowledgement. Even within private circles, insiders say that the level of engagement with the child is minimal, sometimes virtually non-existent. And that lack of acknowledgement, especially from a grandfather, is almost unprecedented in modern royal history. So how did this come to be? The story begins with the move. When Harry and Meghan relocated to California, they intentionally created distance from the traditional mechanisms of the monarchy. They sought privacy, a clean slate, and the ability to raise their children without constant surveillance. That much is evident. But creating privacy does not erase reality. It does not erase timelines. It does not erase the presence of the most senior family member, the king himself. And yet, in Lilibet's case, the public and even insiders are left with only shadows and half-truths. Take, for example, the timing of public announcements. Lilibet's birth was officially announced with a statement from her parents, a carefully constructed message that confirmed her birth and her name. But beyond that, details were scarce. No immediate photographs. No baby steps documented. No introduction to the broader royal family. Only words on a page, emphasizing her parents' gratitude and joy. That alone is unusual, but it is compounded by the apparent absence of verification from Charles. This is where the contradictions begin to multiply. Some reports suggest that Harry and Meghan claimed in interviews that Charles had been involved or at least aware of the birth, yet other insiders, including former aides and palace officials, indicate that he had not even met the child weeks or months after her arrival. How do we reconcile these accounts? That is the question that drives curiosity, fuels speculation, and forms the foundation of a mystery that seems almost too strange to believe. And then there's the emotional angle. Consider the human side of this narrative, a grandfather who may have never seen his granddaughter. The implications are profound. Royals are often depicted as distant, yes, but even within those conventions, there is expectation, there is tradition, there is lineage. The symbolism of acknowledging a new generation is powerful, and its absence sends a silent message. Whether intentional or circumstantial, the effect is the same, a sense of absence, a void in what should be a celebrated continuity. Another layer is the management of media appearances. For Lilibet, every visual moment is tightly controlled. The hand of a parent, glimpses behind furniture, or fleeting shadows in the background of an interview are all that the public sees. Each release is calculated to reveal almost nothing, to provoke curiosity without giving the full picture. And curiosity, when left unresolved, grows into obsession. People begin to piece together timelines, scrutinize photographs, and question statements. And from that scrutiny emerges speculation. This leads us to one of the first major inconsistencies that went largely unnoticed. The birth announcement indicated one thing. The supposed acknowledgments from Charles indicated another, and independent observers were left without confirmation of even a single meeting. A curious gap appeared between expectation and reality. Why? Was it logistics? Was it lingering tension between family members? Was it something deeper, more strategic? What makes this gap so compelling, and why it fuels such fascination, is its contrast with historical precedent. In recent decades, even when royal parents have struggled with public scrutiny or media frenzy, the introduction of a new child has always included some level of acknowledgement from senior family members. Queen Elizabeth herself famously insisted that all her grandchildren be recognized, celebrated, and photographed to ensure public confidence in the lineage. Even in moments of tension, there was visibility. And yet, in Lilibet's case, the visibility is strikingly absent. Here's another point that fuels the intrigue. Despite the scarcity of public moments, every fleeting image has been dissected to the point of obsession. Hand positions, background details, and subtle gestures are scrutinized as if they hold hidden messages. One photo released by the Sussexes shows a small hand peeking over a table, just enough to hint at presence, but never enough to confirm the reality fully. That level of curation suggests careful orchestration, but it also raises questions. Why manage exposure so tightly for one child and not another? Why the extraordinary caution when other royal children are constantly in the public eye? And then comes the alleged statement from King Charles himself. The words, "I have not met her," allegedly spoken in private, send a shockwave through the narrative. It is one thing to manage public appearances, to control media exposure, to curate privacy. It is another to have a grandfather, the heir to one of the oldest monarchies in the world, completely absent from the child's life. These words, whether officially confirmed or reported by insiders, create a fracture between perception and reality. The emotional weight of this cannot be overstated. Imagine being told, or believing, that the king has never held his granddaughter, never cradled her in his arms, never shared in a private family moment. Imagine the tension this creates not just within the family, but in public perception. Contrast this with other royal children. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis have all been regularly documented, both formally and informally. Their milestones are public. Their grandparents have been present in photographs, visits, and celebrations. Even when media coverage is light, the family's acknowledgement is indisputable. Lilibet, by comparison, is a ghost in the narrative, present in official words but largely absent in practice. And here's another element most people overlook: the documents themselves. Official records, while not publicly released in detail, reportedly exist to confirm her birth and identity. But beyond that, the trails are murky. No formal royal visit logs. No public appearances documented by palace photographers. The lack of records is a signal, whether intentional or circumstantial, and it raises questions about why transparency is so limited. Then there's the public's own expectations. We've been trained to expect evidence: photos, statements, footage, first-hand accounts. When those are missing or ambiguous, the mind naturally fills in the gaps. Speculation rises. Rumors spread. Curiosity intensifies. And that curiosity, when met with silence from official channels, grows exponentially. And that brings us to the next point: the strategic management of information. The Sussexes are known for careful media control. Every interview, every appearance, every statement is meticulously crafted. But when that control meets the king's apparent absence, the result is a narrative full of tension, ambiguity, and contradiction. It's not a mistake. It's a story designed to be interpreted, to be questioned, to provoke curiosity, and to leave the public constantly wanting more. Here's the emotional spike. Think about the duality. A child is alive, thriving, and yet essentially invisible in the eyes of one of the most powerful people in her family. The king's alleged private acknowledgement of never having met her isn't just a fact, it's an emotional earthquake. And it's amplified by the contrast. The child exists publicly in the smallest glimpses, yet privately, the family hierarchy seems to bypass the expected connections. Some analysts suggest this absence could be intentional, a protective measure to shield the child from the pressures of royal expectation. Others hint at lingering family tension, unresolved disputes, or personal disagreements that prevent interaction. And while these possibilities exist, they do not fully explain the contradiction between her public presence and the king's alleged private acknowledgement. Which brings us to the first real turning point. The key detail most people have overlooked, the one that will frame the rest of this investigation, is not in a photo, not in a statement, not even in public appearances. It's in the pattern, the absence of traditional recognition, the controlled glimpses, and the silence of senior family members. That pattern is not coincidental. It is deliberate, or at the very least, telling. And once you notice it, you cannot unsee it. The next chapter will take this further. It will explore insider accounts and shed light on the palace perspective. The preparation for Lilibet's expected introduction, the private conversations that were never meant to be public, and the tension simmering behind closed doors. These are the moments where speculation begins to take shape into something almost tangible. And it's in that tension that the real drama begins, the kind of drama that reveals why a simple statement like, "I have not met her," can reverberate through history, family, and public consciousness alike. But then came the private comment allegedly made by King Charles. A comment so quiet yet so powerful that it sent shockwaves through palace walls and beyond, setting the stage for a series of revelations nobody could have anticipated. Picture this: the corridors of Buckingham Palace, the hushed whispers of aides, the careful choreography of a family constantly under observation. Now imagine the reaction when, In the months following Lilibet's birth, staff realized something astonishing. Not because of an event that occurred, but because of one that didn't. There were no planned introductions, no ceremonial visits, no sighting of the king with his granddaughter. The absence itself became a spectacle, one that left palace aides stunned. Royal staff are trained to anticipate the unexpected, to manage protocol, and to maintain appearances. They witness events that the public never sees: birthday parties, formal ceremonies, private moments. Yet in the case of Lilibet, even they were left with gaps they couldn't explain. Invitations were not extended. Rooms were not prepared. The usual flurry of preparations for a new royal child, gifts, photography, carefully orchestrated family gatherings, was markedly absent. Think about what that means emotionally. For staff who have spent decades facilitating family milestones, a royal child is a centerpiece of continuity, legacy, and tradition. The absence of that child from expected family interactions is jarring. It's not merely a missing face at a party. It's a fracture in the rhythm of monarchy itself. Staff began to question, is this oversight or something more deliberate? And the more they observed, the stranger it became. Lilibet, while acknowledged in statements by her parents, seemed to exist almost exclusively in controlled media releases. There were short glimpses. A tiny hand in a video, a soft background voice, fleeting images during interviews. But these were carefully curated moments, each one designed to reveal enough to confirm her existence, but never enough to allow anyone, palace staff included, to witness her fully. Insiders recount the unease in the palace. Conversations that might have been mundane were laced with tension. Staff debated what was protocol and what was personal choice. They speculated on family dynamics, whispering about possible rifts between the Sussexes and the senior royals. And at the center of this uncertainty stood one fact. The king, the grandfather, reportedly had no direct interaction with his granddaughter. Now, pause to consider the broader implications. A child exists, yet the king has never seen her. The aides, who are accustomed to orchestrating events down to the last detail, suddenly found themselves managing absence. Imagine setting a stage for a family introduction, only for the main participants to be missing. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. Staff, loyal and experienced, had no framework for this. And then there were the communications. Some aides reportedly tried to coordinate visits, to bridge the gap between Lilibet and her grandparents. Invitations were suggested, plans floated, and logistics proposed. But each attempt reportedly met with resistance or ambiguity, often leaving staff unsure whether to push forward or step back. The tension between expectation and reality became almost unbearable. The emotional stakes rise further when you consider the optics. Royals are constantly scrutinized by the public and media. Any absence, any perceived slight, is analyzed and dissected. Staff understood this. They knew that a child who exists publicly in statements but is absent in practice could create narratives, rumors, and speculation that might spiral out of control. Their challenge wasn't just protocol. It was managing perception, loyalty, and secrecy simultaneously. And then, the private comment allegedly from King Charles entered the picture. The aides, who had been grappling with the anomaly of absence, suddenly had context, or at least an alleged explanation. "I have not met her," he reportedly said. Simple, short, quiet, but it reverberated. What seemed like an unspoken understanding between staff and monarchy became public fodder in whispers, leaks, and insider discussions. The silence that followed this revelation was telling. Staff had known about the gaps, but to hear confirmation, even in private, that the king had never met his granddaughter was a shock. It reframed everything. The absence was no longer a logistical curiosity. It was a deliberate, emotional, and cultural statement. And this leads to the heart of the intrigue. Why? Why would a grandfather, a monarch, refrain from meeting his granddaughter, if not physically, then even symbolically? Staff speculated endlessly. Was it personal? Was it political? Was it protective, a strategy to shield the child from public scrutiny? Or was it something more? Every anecdote shared by insiders points to tension. Every small detail, from missing gifts to unplanned meetings, paints a picture of family dynamics far more complex than the polished public narrative suggests. And for those who lived within the palace walls, the story was not just about a child. It was about control, legacy, and the delicate balance of private and public life. The most chilling aspect of all, staff weren't simply witnessing absence. They were witnessing a potential shift in the family's hierarchy. If a child could exist without the king's acknowledgement, if tradition could be bypassed quietly, what did that mean for the monarchy's future? And what did it say about power, influence, and the unspoken rules of engagement within one of the world's most famous families? And yet, despite all this speculation, the public remained largely unaware. The image of the child was fleeting, carefully managed by her parents. The king's alleged words were private, heard only through whispers. And the palace staff, who lived the drama daily, could only manage the fallout quietly, hoping that the gaps would not become glaring scandals. But the pattern was undeniable. Absence, secrecy, and controlled glimpses formed a trail of breadcrumbs that, when followed closely, revealed a family navigating uncharted emotional and logistical terrain. The tension between what is expected and what is real became almost unbearable, both for staff and for the public piecing together the story. And as the layers peeled back, one thing became clear: this is not just a story about a royal child. It's a story about family dynamics under pressure, about secrets kept behind closed doors, about tradition and modernity colliding in ways few could have predicted. And it all pivots on a single, astonishing detail. The king, the grandfather, reportedly has never met Lilibet. But then came the private comment allegedly made by King Charles, the very statement that would ignite questions, speculation, and debates about the child's place in the monarchy and the unfolding narrative of the Sussexes. It was simple, yet seismic, and it set the stage for revelations that nobody saw coming. Every mystery has a starting point, a moment where the ordinary suddenly seems strange. In the case of Lilibet, that moment lies hidden in the timeline, the sequence of events that, on the surface, seems straightforward, but when examined closely, reveals gaps, contradictions, and questions that no official narrative has fully addressed. Let's begin with the reported birth date, June 4, 2021. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle confirmed the birth via their official statement. Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor was welcomed into the world, her arrival celebrated by her parents in words, but not in images. The announcement was brief, formal, and carefully crafted. It contained gratitude, joy, and a nod to privacy. But notably absent were details that typically accompany a royal child's arrival: photographs, immediate visits from family, or a public introduction of grandparents. And that absence is our first clue. In the royal family, every new arrival is meticulously documented. Even in moments of tension or disagreement, there is a protocol, a visit, a gift, a formal acknowledgement. Yet here, the king's alleged non-engagement breaks precedent. For decades, royal births, even private ones, have included at least ceremonial recognition. Lilibet's case doesn't follow that pattern. Now, look at the weeks that followed. Statements by Harry and Meghan remained sparse. Occasionally, the child was mentioned in interviews or glimpsed in controlled media appearances. There were photographs, carefully curated, minimal, sometimes showing only a hand or the back of the child's head. But each media release came with an unspoken restriction: the broader family, including the king, was not present. This creates a curious contradiction: public acknowledgement without familial engagement. Then there's the question of internal communication. Palace aides reportedly attempted to coordinate visits, anticipating a post-birth meeting between Lilibet and senior royals. Invitations were floated, schedules discussed, and protocols considered. Yet the meetings never materialized. The reasons remain unclear, though insiders hint at logistical challenges, emotional tension, and perhaps lingering conflict. What is clear is that the timeline does not match public expectation. The king reportedly remained absent for months after the birth. The next element of the timeline that raises eyebrows is media coverage. The Sussexes were highly visible during this period, engaging in interviews, podcasts, and social media statements. Yet Lilibet's appearances remained almost entirely controlled, fleeting, and partial. Contrast this with other royal children. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis had numerous documented appearances, both private and public, within weeks of their births. Lilibet, in comparison, was almost entirely absent from public life. This discrepancy raises a question. Why? Why would one child receive such selective exposure, while others are presented widely? Some suggest privacy concerns, protecting the child from media scrutiny. Others hint at family tension, disagreements over protocol, or even personal differences between the Sussexes and the senior royals. Regardless of the reason, the outcome is the same. A child whose presence is simultaneously confirmed and invisible. Now, let's examine a specific moment in that timeline. In November 2021, the Sussexes participated in an interview that subtly referenced Lilibet. Observant viewers noted a hand in frame and soft, background noises attributed to the child. But once again, no senior family members were involved. Not Charles, not Camilla, not any of the Cambridge family. The child was mentioned, briefly glimpsed, yet completely absent from any broader family interaction. This pattern repeats itself. Presence is acknowledged, but engagement remains absent. And then comes the king's alleged statement. I have not met her. According to insider reports, these words were said quietly but deliberately. They create a seismic shift in how the timeline is interpreted. Absence is no longer an anomaly. It becomes a confirmed reality. The sequence of events suddenly reads not as a series of logistical coincidences, but as a deliberate separation, or at least a maintained distance, between grandfather and granddaughter. But the timeline offers even more contradictions. While the public sees a few controlled images, private sources suggest that the child was, at times, in proximity to senior royals' residences without formal introductions. That is, she may have existed in the orbit of the monarchy without crossing the threshold of acknowledged presence. A paradox emerges. Lilibet is near yet unseen, known yet invisible. The timeline itself becomes a riddle, one that forces us to question the nature of visibility, acknowledgement, and family connection. This timeline also intersects with public perceptions of the Sussexes' media strategy. Each controlled appearance, each careful statement, each blurred image contributes to a pattern, a story built on suggestion rather than confirmation. The child is real, alive, and present in the public imagination, yet any attempt to place her definitively in the monarchy's fold is thwarted by gaps in the timeline and silence from the king. Here's where it gets even more compelling. When we chart these events side by side, birth, announcements, media appearances, and the alleged absence of the king, a pattern emerges. The story is not random. It is curated, intentional, and layered. It suggests a deliberate orchestration of visibility and absence, a narrative carefully balanced between secrecy and acknowledgement. And the deeper we go, the more questions arise. Who controls this narrative? Why is the king absent? How does this affect perceptions of Lilibet's place in the family? The timeline is our roadmap. It shows us what is visible and what is hidden. It points to contradictions and anomalies. And it sets the stage for deeper exploration into family dynamics, public perception, and the tension between expectation and reality. Sometimes, the most significant moments in history aren't captured by cameras or official announcements. Sometimes, they happen in whispers, in hallways, in conversations meant to remain private. The alleged words of King Charles regarding Lilibet fall into this category. According to insiders, at a private moment not intended for the public eye, he made a statement that stunned those around him. I have not met her. At first glance, the statement seems simple, almost mundane. But in the context of the royal family, it is anything but ordinary. Every child in the lineage is expected to be acknowledged. Every milestone is observed. And here, a monarch, a grandfather, reportedly admits to having had no personal interaction with a grandchild. The emotional weight of this is enormous, and the ripple effects extend far beyond the palace walls. Staff reportedly reacted with a mixture of disbelief and concern. For those who manage the daily operations of the monarchy, absence is unusual. Grandchildren are not merely familial connections. They are symbols of continuity, of legacy, of the future of the monarchy. The lack of acknowledgement wasn't a logistical oversight. It was a statement in itself, whether intentional or circumstantial. What adds layers to this revelation is timing. The words were allegedly spoken months after Lilibet's birth, at a moment when public expectation would have dictated at least a private family visit. That it had not occurred yet, according to insiders, only amplified the sense of anomaly. The king's comment, simple as it was, reframed every assumption about the child's presence within the family. Emotional tension ran high among palace aides. They were caught between protocol, loyalty, and reality. On one hand, they had to respect the king's privacy and authority. On the other, they were witnessing a deviation from centuries of royal tradition. The private acknowledgement, reported in whispers, made them question the underlying family dynamics. Was it a personal choice, a reflection of estrangement, or a strategic decision to maintain distance? Public perception, of course, was initially unaware of this private revelation. The media had glimpses of Lilibet, a hand in a video here, a fleeting image there, but the alleged statement from the king remained under wraps. Yet those who knew of it immediately understood its significance. It wasn't merely about absence, it was about confirmation. Confirmation that a gap existed, that the child's integration into the family had been delayed, that the narrative the public believed might be only a partial truth. Now, consider the broader emotional stakes. For the king, a lifetime devoted to service, tradition, and family legacy, such a statement would not be made lightly. There are decades of protocol, expectation, and scrutiny surrounding every action. To declare, even in private, that he had never met his granddaughter is a profound acknowledgement of distance, of absence, and perhaps of tension. And then there's the human element. Imagine being aware of a grandchild, yet remaining absent. The emotional complexity is staggering. Duty versus personal choice, love versus tension, tradition versus modern circumstance. And for palace aides who manage the optics of royalty, this is a dilemma they cannot easily solve. The king's words create a ripple, one that challenges assumptions, protocols, and even the public's understanding of what a royal family should look like. The contrast becomes even more striking when compared to other royal children. Previous generations, even amid conflict or distance, ensured that grandchildren were introduced, acknowledged, and photographed. Queen Elizabeth, for instance, made it a point to be present for her grandchildren's milestones whenever possible. The absence here is unprecedented in modern history, and that unprecedented absence is precisely what has fueled speculation, analysis, and intrigue. Insiders also note the careful management of information following the statement. While the words were private, the impact was felt immediately. Staff adjusted schedules, managed communications, and navigated the delicate balance of discretion and duty. Every interaction, every meeting, every appearance had to be reconsidered in light of this new reality. The emotional tension doesn't stop there. For the public, once the alleged words became known through leaks or insider reports, the narrative shifted dramatically. Suddenly, Lilibet was no longer just a child of the Sussexes. She was a focal point in a story of family absence, secrecy, and tension at the highest levels of the monarchy. Questions multiplied. Why had the king not met her? Was it a matter of choice, circumstance, or disagreement? And what did this mean for the child's place within the royal family? And the deeper you dig, the more contradictions appear. The public sees curated images and statements suggesting presence and normalcy, while the alleged private acknowledgement tells a different story: absence, distance, and a gap between perception and reality. These contradictions are the fuel for speculation, debate, and intrigue, and they make every following revelation in this story all the more compelling. Which brings us to the inevitable tension. If a monarch can remain absent from a grandchild's life, what does that say about tradition, duty, and family cohesion? And if the public perception is carefully managed while private realities tell another story, how do we reconcile these layers of secrecy and presentation? The answer, as we will explore in the next chapters, lies not just in isolated events, but in patterns, behaviors, and the intersections of personality, protocol, and public narrative. The king's alleged words are the first major insight into these hidden dynamics, and they set the stage for revelations that are as emotionally gripping as they are shocking. But the tension is far from resolved, because once you follow this thread deeper, you begin to see that absence is just one layer of a story filled with contradictions, curated appearances, and emotional undercurrents that reach all the way to the heart of the royal family. Even the most careful observers can be deceived by what they see or think they see. In the case of Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor, the public has been given glimpses, tiny, fleeting, carefully orchestrated moments that confirm her existence without revealing too much. These glimpses have become the focal point of speculation, debate, and emotional investment worldwide. Consider the first widely circulated visual hint, a brief clip during an interview with Harry and Meghan. Viewers noticed a small hand resting on a table, just enough to suggest the presence of a child. No face was shown, no interaction with extended family was captured, but the moment sparked an explosion of curiosity. People dissected the frame, analyzed the background, and debated the identity of the hand. Some dismissed it as a staged prop, others insisted it was undeniable proof. But in reality, it was a calculated release, enough to confirm existence, not enough to provide clarity. Why would such controlled glimpses matter so much? Because they serve a dual purpose. First, they maintain the narrative of the Sussexes' privacy, ensuring that the child grows without media intrusion. Second, they create a tantalizing ambiguity, a puzzle that invites speculation without providing definitive answers. For the public, each fleeting image becomes a riddle. For the monarchy, it's a delicate balancing act of exposure and discretion. The next notable glimpse came during a formal event in California, where the Sussexes were photographed leaving a venue with a small figure partially visible behind a stroller. Observers immediately noted the child's size, clothing, and even posture. The photo circulated rapidly online, triggering debates about whether this was truly Lilibet or a staged moment. Again, the key detail was what wasn't shown. No interaction with grandparents, no official acknowledgement, nothing that tied the child to the broader royal family visually. These fleeting glimpses also reveal an emotional undertone. The careful framing, the partial views, the avoidance of faces, these are deliberate choices. They suggest a desire to protect, yes, but they also hint at an underlying tension. Why show the child at all if the goal is privacy? Why reveal hints while keeping the larger family absent? Each glimpse becomes a narrative tool, simultaneously confirming and obscuring, creating layers of intrigue that keep the audience engaged and guessing. And the more the public scrutinized these moments, the more contradictions emerged. Some media outlets claimed the king had seen photos privately, others insisted he had no contact. Some sources suggested brief virtual interactions, others confirmed no engagement whatsoever. The fleeting glimpses, meant to satisfy curiosity, instead fueled a web of speculation that grew more complex with each new visual hint. Consider the emotional impact of this strategy. For fans and royal watchers, each partial image evokes longing, curiosity, and even frustration. People want to see the child fully, to confirm the narrative of continuity, lineage, and family connection. Yet every release deliberately withholds key information, heightening suspense. The Sussexes have mastered a delicate dance, revealing just enough to maintain interest while withholding enough to preserve privacy. The fleeting glimpses also have a psychological effect. By providing partial confirmation, the Sussexes manipulate the public perception of reality. Viewers know she exists, yet cannot fully visualize her. This controlled ambiguity keeps conversations alive, speculation rampant, and curiosity at its peak. It's a storytelling tactic as old as media itself, now applied to one of the most scrutinized families in the world. But there's another layer to consider, the contrast with the king's alleged words. If Charles has never met Lilibet, then these glimpses take on a new meaning. They become symbols not just of presence, but of absence. The public sees a child, the grandfather does not. The emotional weight of that disconnect is profound. It raises questions about loyalty, family dynamics, and the impact of deliberate distance on a child's early years. Insiders suggest that each release was calculated for timing, emotional impact, and public reaction. A hand here, a foot peeking out there, a shadow in the background. Each moment serves as a breadcrumb leading the audience deeper into the mystery. For palace aides and royal observers, the strategy is both frustrating and fascinating. They see the control, the orchestration, and the underlying message. Presence does not equal access. And the more these glimpses circulated, the more pressure built for clarity. The public demanded confirmation, historians wanted context, and journalists chased every scrap of evidence. Yet each attempt to reveal more was met with careful resistance, deliberate opacity, and a maintenance of distance. The Sussexes had created an almost perfect balance. A child who exists, glimpsed but never fully revealed, acknowledged but not engaged with by senior family members. But then came a moment that shifted perception entirely. A small, seemingly insignificant leak, a private photograph circulated to a trusted journalist, suggested a discrepancy. For the first time, the public saw an image that hinted at potential engagement or at least proximity with the broader family, contradicting the king's alleged statement. Analysts scrambled to reconcile the visuals with the words. Was the king truly absent? Had there been private encounters? The fleeting glimpses had set the stage, but this leak ignited the real debate. And just as the tension reached its peak, questions began to surface that had never been asked before. If a monarch can remain absent from a grandchild, what does that say about tradition, duty, and family cohesion? And if the public narrative is carefully managed while private realities tell another story, how do we reconcile these layers of secrecy, perception, and emotion? The story of Lilibet isn't just told through photographs, announcements, or fleeting glimpses. It's also whispered behind palace walls, in private conversations, and through the accounts of insiders who have seen the family dynamics up close. These insiders, from former aides to longtime royal staff, paint a picture that is as complex as it is emotionally charged. According to multiple reports, the arrival of Lilibet created immediate tension within the royal family. The child, born into one of the most scrutinized families in history, represented both continuity and disruption. Continuity, because every new generation is a link in the lineage of monarchy. Disruption, because the Sussexes had intentionally created distance, asserting autonomy in ways that challenged traditional expectations. Some insiders claim that the king was aware of Lilibet's birth almost immediately, yet chose not to engage in person. The reasoning remains opaque. Was it logistical? The Sussexes were thousands of miles away in California, living private lives far from the reach of palace protocol. Or was it personal? A deliberate distancing, fueled by lingering tensions, past disputes, or perceived slights. Staff who attempted to organize visits reportedly met resistance or ambiguous responses, leaving them unsure whether to push for engagement or respect the parents' wishes. The tension was compounded by media scrutiny. Every controlled glimpse of Lilibet created speculation. Had she been seen by her grandparents? Was there contact behind closed doors? Insider accounts suggest that the palace staff themselves were navigating a delicate web, balancing loyalty, discretion, and the expectations of the public. They knew that any misstep could ignite rumors, and yet the absence of visible interaction was in itself fueling intrigue. Some aides reportedly expressed frustration over the situation. Royal staff, accustomed to orchestrating ceremonies, milestones, and public appearances, suddenly found themselves managing absence. They had to maintain normal operations while accommodating an anomaly, a grandchild whose presence existed in statements and glimpses, but not in direct interaction with one of the most senior family members. One particularly revealing account suggests that when plans were proposed for a potential visit or acknowledgement, discussions would stall over vague objections. Timing, privacy, and protocol were cited, but insiders hint at an undercurrent of unresolved tension. The Sussexes were protective of their family unit, while the palace was guided by tradition, expectation, and duty. The result, a prolonged gap in engagement. Emotional dynamics also played a significant role. Grandparental absence, whether intentional or circumstantial, carries emotional weight. For Charles, this gap may have reflected a mix of protocol, caution, and personal sentiment. For Harry and Meghan, controlling access and exposure ensured privacy and safety, but also created a perception of distance. And for palace staff, caught in the middle, the situation required navigating complex interpersonal and professional pressures. Insiders also highlight the contrast between Lilibet's presence in the media and absence in family interactions. While she is occasionally glimpsed in controlled releases, These moments do not show engagement with senior family members. Staff who managed these appearances reportedly understood the dual purpose, confirming existence while preserving autonomy. But the strategy also intensified speculation, particularly in media outlets hungry for insight into the royal family's internal dynamics. The insiders' accounts also shed light on potential motivations behind the king's alleged absence. Some suggest it was a protective measure, intended to allow the child a normal upbringing away from intense scrutiny. Others point to lingering personal tension, a reflection of past disputes, divergent priorities, or perceived disrespect. Whatever the cause, the result is the same: a gap that defies traditional expectations of family acknowledgement within the monarchy. What makes these insider revelations compelling is the convergence of patterns. Absence, controlled glimpses, and private acknowledgement together form a narrative that is emotionally charged and historically unusual. Each element reinforces the other, painting a portrait of a family navigating unprecedented circumstances. And yet, insiders caution against oversimplification. They stress that these dynamics are nuanced. Absence does not necessarily imply neglect or hostility. Curated appearances do not equate to secrecy for secrecy's sake. The interplay between tradition, modernity, personal choice, and public expectation is complicated, layered, and highly sensitive. But one fact remains undeniable. The king reportedly has not met Lilibet, and the gap between expectation and reality has created an emotional and narrative tension that ripples through palace corridors, media coverage, and public perception alike. This tension sets the stage for the next revelation, an unexpected public moment, a subtle yet unmistakable interaction that will force both the family and the public to confront the questions that have been building since the child's birth. In stories like this, the truth often hides in plain sight. It isn't always in bold statements, dramatic appearances, or viral photographs. Sometimes, it's in the subtle signals, small gestures, minor details, fleeting interactions that most observers overlook. And in the case of Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor, these subtle signals have been both the key to confirming her existence and the source of endless speculation. Consider the first type of subtle signal: absence as a signal itself. The king's alleged lack of direct engagement is not just a fact, it's a message. In the world of royal protocol, absence speaks volumes. When grandparents are present, it signals continuity, endorsement, and familial closeness. When they are absent, it raises questions about distance, choice, or tension. Observers, keen to read between the lines, immediately recognize the significance. Absence became as communicative as presence. Then there are controlled glimpses. A hand here, a shadow there, a soft voice audible in the background. These moments are deliberate. The Sussexes have mastered subtlety, providing evidence of the child's existence without granting full access or control. These glimpses are visual breadcrumbs, each one carefully measured to confirm presence while maintaining discretion. Analysts note that the precision is uncanny. Nothing accidental, nothing overly revealing, yet enough to keep the world watching. Even the timing of media mentions carries meaning. In interviews, podcasts, and statements, Lilibet is referenced at calculated intervals. Sometimes she is mentioned in passing, other times, her presence is subtly reinforced through background cues. Every mention signals reality without fully integrating her into the narrative of the senior royal family. These are deliberate communications, speaking to both public curiosity and internal family boundaries. Another subtle signal lies in body language and framing. Observers of video footage and photographs have noted that the Sussexes position Lilibet in ways that suggest care, attention, and privacy. She is rarely placed in the foreground or center stage. Instead, her presence is implied, hinted at, and contextualized within family or parental interactions. The technique conveys protection and control while fueling speculation. If she exists, why is she hidden from certain family members? The emotional resonance of these subtle signals cannot be overstated. For the public, the glimpses evoke curiosity, longing, and sometimes frustration. For insiders, the controlled presentation demonstrates strategy, awareness, and foresight. And for the king, the alleged absence interacts with these signals, creating a multi-layered narrative where perception, reality, and emotion intersect in complex ways. Then there are the leaks and unofficial confirmations. Over time, journalists and royal watchers have pieced together fragments, small anecdotes, whispered reports, and fleeting images. Each fragment serves as a subtle confirmation, strengthening the case that Lilibet exists while reinforcing the mystery surrounding her interactions with senior family members. These signals, though minor individually, collectively form a pattern that observers cannot ignore. Even social media plays a role in these subtle communications. Every post, every carefully crafted message, every public interaction is analyzed for hidden meaning. Hashtags, phrasing, and timing are scrutinized for cues about family engagement. Analysts note that the Sussexes' media strategy amplifies the ambiguity, providing reassurance without full disclosure, confirming existence while maintaining distance. And perhaps the most intriguing subtle signal is contradiction itself. On one hand, there are glimpses suggesting the child's presence and thriving life. On the other hand, there are reported statements from the king about never having met her. The tension between these two realities becomes a signal in itself. It highlights family distance, raises questions about internal dynamics, and forces the public to reconcile visibility with absence. These subtle signals, while easy to miss, are foundational to the narrative. They create curiosity, engagement, and speculation. They invite observers to analyze every detail, question assumptions, and seek patterns. And in doing so, they maintain the mystery while providing enough evidence to keep the audience hooked. In the world of royal scrutiny, leaks are dangerous, powerful, and often transformative. They can upend narratives, challenge assumptions, and force the public to confront truths previously hidden behind closed doors. For Lilibet Diana Mountbatten-Windsor, such a leak would become a turning point, a moment where speculation met evidence and ambiguity collided with revelation. The leak arrived quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. A photograph, allegedly taken at a private gathering, appeared in a minor publication before spreading across social media. At first glance, it seemed innocuous, a small figure partially visible behind a stroller, bathed in soft light, face obscured. But for those who had been following the story, every detail was loaded with